Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I am Muneeb Harvith with the news of this hour. Let's begin with the top stories first. Brazil has yet again reported a record 3,869 daily COVID-19 deaths, pushing its toll to over 321,000. Saudi Arabia has ruled that COVID-19 vaccination will not be a prerequisite to perform the Umrah pilgrimage in Ramadan. In Pakistan, nearly 5,000 people have tested positive, while 98 died overnight, pushing the death toll past 14,500. While globally, the virus has claimed more than 2.8 million lives and infected over 128 million people so far. The Taliban claim to have shot down a Black Hawk helicopter of the Afghan military in southern Helmand province. A Taliban spokesperson says a key Afghan commander and 4 other soldiers were killed in the attack. However, the Afghan Defense Ministry says the helicopter made an emergency landing without any casualties. In the US state of California, 4 people, including a child, have been killed and 2 others wounded in a mass shooting at a business complex in Orange City. Police say the suspected shooter is among those injured. They add the situation has been contained and there is no ongoing threat to the public. The UN envoy has urged Security Council to consider a significant action in Myanmar, warning of an imminent bloodbath. However, the Chinese UN envoy rejected sanctions on Myanmar and called for a democratic transition. This comes after 20 soldiers were killed in clashes with ethnic minority insurgents. Meanwhile, the anti-coup protests continue across the country despite the military crackdown that has claimed 536 civilian lives so far. Well, these were the top stories. News in detail after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now let's have the news in detail. Brazil has yet again reported a record 3,869 daily COVID-19 deaths, pushing its toll to over 321,000. Globally, the virus has claimed more than 2.8 million lives and infected over 128 million people. More on the coronavirus in this report.
Record high COVID-19 deaths and cases have got the world on the ropes again. While many countries are desperate for vaccine supply, about 15 million doses of Johnson & Johnson's have reportedly been ruined due to a factory error in the USA. New study shows the rates of stillbirth and maternal death rose by 1/3 during the pandemic, with the most acute impact in poor countries. Meanwhile, as Brazil struggles with record numbers of cases and deaths, President Jair Bolsonaro railed against restrictions.
Essa política entendo eu.
This policy of isolation, restrictive measures with a curfew, with the suppression of the right to come and go, goes far beyond even a state of siege. I appeal to all the authorities in Brazil to review this policy and allow the people to go to work.
Over in Europe, Ankara says the variant first detected in the UK now accounts for 75% of all cases in Turkey. Finland has ruled out stay-home orders, choosing constitutional liberties over extraordinary containment measures. Meanwhile, as third wave weighs down, Belgian hospitals have been ordered to reserve 60% of ICU beds for COVID patients. EU's drug regulator's chief says the agency is investigating 62 reports of blood clotting after using the AstraZeneca vaccine.
A causal link with the vaccine has not yet been proven, but it is possible and further analysis is still ongoing. According to the current scientific knowledge, there is no evidence that would support restricting the use of this vaccine in any population.
Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia says COVID-19 vaccination will not be a prerequisite to performing the Umrah pilgrimage in Ramadan. India has now opened up its inoculation program to people above 45. Meanwhile, Beijing International Airport has shipped over 1,100 tons of vaccines to 41 countries and regions.
Well, meanwhile, in Pakistan, which has recorded nearly 100 COVID-19 deaths overnight, cases in the country continue to surge, with nearly 5,000 people infected over the past 24 hours. The health ministry says the country's death toll has climbed to 14,530. The ministry said out of nearly 673,000 confirmed cases, over 605,000 have recovered. However, the number of active cases has shot up over 53,000. The country's positivity rate has also risen above 10%. Now, the Taliban claim to have shot down a Black Hawk helicopter of the Afghan military in southern Helmand province. A Taliban spokesperson says a key Afghan commander and 4 other soldiers were killed in the attack. He said the helicopter was targeted in a retaliatory attack. However, the Afghan Defense Ministry says the helicopter made an emergency landing without any casualties. Meanwhile, officials say 6 security personnel were killed and several wounded in separate Taliban attacks in the Herat province. Now moving to Ethiopia, where gunmen have killed 30 civilians and injured 15 others in an attack on a village in the west of Oromia region. Witnesses said most of the victims belong to the ethnic Amhara community. Local authorities have blamed the attack on a splinter group from the opposition party Oromo Liberation Front. But a spokesperson for the group has denied responsibility for the attack. The 2 neighboring regions of Amhara and Oromia share a border. Civilians from one ethnic group living on the other side of the border have been subject to attacks in recent months. Now, in the U.S. state of California, 4 people, including a child, have been killed and 2 others wounded in a mass shooting at a business complex in Orange City. Police say the suspected shooter is among those injured. In a Facebook post, the police said no officers were injured in the shooting. They said the situation has been contained and there is no ongoing threat to the public. In a statement, California's Governor Gavin Newsom termed the incident horrifying and heartbreaking. This marks the 3rd mass shooting incident in the U.S. in the last 2 weeks. Now, a UN envoy has urged Security Council to consider a significant action in Myanmar, warning of an imminent bloodbath. This comes after 20 soldiers were killed in clashes with ethnic minority insurgents. Envoy Skrana Bergener told the Security Council that Myanmar's military is not capable of managing the country. However, the Chinese UN envoy rejected sanctions on Myanmar and called for a democratic transition. Meanwhile, the anti-coup protests continue across the country despite the military crackdown that has claimed 536 civilian lives so far. Moving on now, the United States and the Philippines have discussed their shared concerns on South China Sea. U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan called his Philippines counterpart Armogenes Esperon over the phone to discuss the matter. The White House says the 2 counterparts agreed to coordinate closely in responding to challenges in South China Sea. Washington pledged support to Manila in upholding a rules-based international maritime order. This comes after the Philippines described the presence of Chinese boats in the Whitsun Reef as a threat. However, China denied the allegation, saying the boats were merely sheltering from rough seas. Now, U.S. President Joe Biden's administration says it considers Israel's control of the West Bank as occupation. This comes after the release of State Department's report that adopted language used by previous U.S. administration to downplay them. State Department spokesperson said the report on human rights used the term occupation in the context of the current status of the West Bank. In a press briefing, Ned Price said, considering Israel's control as occupation is a long-standing position of previous administrations of both parties. The recent report continued with the previously changed format of naming section on Israel and occupied territories as Israel, West Bank and Gaza. Now, the U.S. says it will continue to work with the UN and regional leaders to help bring about a sustainable ceasefire in Yemen. In a statement, State Department said the U.S. Special Envoy recently held productive meetings with Saudi, Omani and Yemeni leaders. It said Team Blender King's discussions focused on inclusive political talks and a durable peace agreement in Yemen. Washington said the Special Envoy also emphasized the need to address Yemen's humanitarian and economic crisis. The statement also welcomed Saudi Arabia's announcement to provide over $422 million for fuel products in Yemen. Now, Russia says the U.S. has shown a willingness to find a compromise aiming to restore the joint comprehensive plan of action. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov says Russia supports the development of a dialogue on the return to the Iran nuclear deal. In a think tank conference, he said Russia insists on the restoration of the JCPOA without any modification. But he said the West aims to restore the deal, coupled with additional restrictions on Tehran's missile programs. The implementation of the 2015 deal has stalled after the U.S. unilaterally withdrew from it in 2018. A year later, the Iranian president announced that Tehran was suspending part of its obligations under the deal. Moving on now, Lebanese group Hezbollah says the time has come for politicians to set aside their differences and form a new government. In a televised speech, the group's leader Syed Hassan Nasrallah said serious efforts are made recently to ease a political standoff. But he said the country has run out of time and spirit. Prime Minister-designate Saad al-Hariri and President Michel Aoun have been at loggerheads since October. The standoff has dashed hopes of forming a new unity government. Lebanon is racing towards a financial meltdown, posing the most serious threat to its stability. United Nations experts have expressed concern over reports of grave human rights abuses by the Russian-backed groups in Central African Republic. In a report, the UN experts highlighted Russian contractors' connections to violent attacks following national election. The world body pointed out that the offences include mass summary executions, arbitrary detentions and torture. They said forced displacements of civilians, indiscriminate targeting of civilians, facilitates and humanitarian workers were reported. The UN condemned the acts and called for accountability to achieve sustainable peace and stability in the country. Now, Turkey has slammed a section of the U.S. annual human rights report on it, calling it far from being objective. In a statement, the Foreign Ministry said the report contains unfounded allegations based on ambiguous sources. In the U.S. report, officials said Turkey's targeting of those suspected of links to the Kurdistan Workers' Party is concerning. Ankara said this demonstrates that the U.S. still fails to understand Ankara's rightful fight against this terrorist organization. It said claims in the context of Turkey's counter-terrorism operations in Syria are unacceptable. The ministry stressed that Turkey remains firm on promoting and protecting human rights. Now, the U.S. says it is concerned about recent escalations of Russian aggression in eastern Ukraine. The Pentagon says it reached out to Russia to get more clarity over the situation. Chiefs of staff of Russian and the U.S. militaries held a telephone call to discuss the Russia-Ukraine border issue. Pentagon spokesperson John Kirby said the U.S. discussed concerns about the increase in ceasefire violations. The call comes as Ukraine said Russia is building up armed forces near its borders in a threat to the country's security. Earlier, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken rang up his Ukrainian counterpart over the situation. He reaffirmed U.S.'s support for Ukraine in what he called the face of Russia's ongoing aggression in the Donbass and Crimea. Now, Italy says it has expelled 2 Russian diplomats. This came after police caught an Italian Navy captain accusing him of passing secret documents to a Russian military official in return for money. Italian Carabinieri police said they arrested the captain and the Russian embassy staff member in a car park in Rome. Police say the captain conducted a secret meeting with Russian officials. According to local media, the captain was paid over $5,800 for the documents. Foreign Minister Luigi Di Maio said Italy summoned the Russian ambassador to launch a formal protest. Meanwhile, Britain's Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab says his country backs Italy's actions. Brazil has named new commanders of its armed forces on the anniversary of the 1964 military coup. This comes a day after President Jair Bolsonaro sacked the previous three chiefs over suspicion of a coup plot. Brazil's new defense minister Walter Braga Neto made the announcement in a news conference. Neto said Paulo Sergio Nogueira de Oliveira will take over the army, while Almir Garnier will take charge of the Navy and Carlos Almeida Baptista Jr. the Air Force. Meanwhile, pro- and anti-Bolsonaro protests erupted across the country after he defended the coup and the 2 decades of dictatorship in his speech. More news coming up in this news bulletin after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Now in business, shares in Asia-Pacific are trading higher as investors anticipate positive economic data releases across the region as the second quarter kicks off. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index is leading the gain, jumping over 1%. The Nikkei 225 in Japan has added well above 0.5%. Seoul's Kospi and Australia's ASX 200 also gained over 0.5%. Stocks in mainland China too edged up marginally. Now in sports, let's start with tennis. Jannik Sinner and Roberto Bautista Agut have qualified for the semi-finals of the Miami Open. Sinner beat Kazakhstan's Alexander Bublik 7-6 and 6-4 in the quarterfinals to reach his first ATP 1000 Masters semi. The Italian hit 28 forehand winners and took 1 hour and 41 minutes to dispatch Bublik. Sinner will now face Agut in the Final Four contest. Spaniard Agut shocked top seed Russian Daniil Medvedev 6-4 and 6-2 to advance. In the women's singles, Maria Sakkari ended Naomi Osaka's 23-match winning streak by beating her 6-0 and 6-4 in the quarterfinals. In Chile, a kayaker used his canoe to descend down a mountain to land the world's first double kick flip off a waterfall. Details in this report. A Spanish kayaker went to the next level while performing mind-blowing acrobatics on his watercraft to set up a new world record. Aniol Sarasoles took off to Chile to set up the ultimate natural obstacle course, featuring a 25-kilometer descent which forms part of the Villarrica volcano. He began descending down the snowy volcanic mountain using his canoe as a sled to reach a river in the dense forest. Sarasoles then navigated through the steep hill before landing the first ever double kickflip down a waterfall. In the course of his trajectory, Sarasoles sped up to 100 kilometers per hour. Earlier, he also overcame a crash during a practice run, which flung him 10 meters through the air. Well, with that, we come to the end of this news bulletin. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news. Take care.